bearing in mind that the most coffee is produced by very small entities, smallholders, producing. I mean, to what extent are those producers taking or able to take advantage of the products you're explaining?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I was actually thinking about that while preparing the presentation, and it's challenging. It's hard because one of the key challenges is just simply getting credit to be able to hedge your coffee production, and whether it's through the exchanges or through a bank, if you don't have a balance sheet, it becomes a challenge. And I think this is something where there are efforts being made by the World Bank, particularly, and also by other countries to create, I guess I would call it a credit backstop that would allow smaller farmers to be able to access some of these tools. But it's absolutely critical to be able to access certain tools. Otherwise, you're really punting, and you are relying on the market, and the market is not always so friendly.
Just a point to that,
Yep.
you know, I agree. If we take it back to the sustainability idea, you know, you don't necessarily want producers to have to deal with volatility, not only in the coffee but also in the exchange rate. It doesn't matter what your view is, whether you think coffee is going to go to $2.50 tomorrow or it's going to go to $1. There will always be that volatility there. And as Graham mentioned, a number of good programs are already out there. The World Bank does some interesting work. Mexico, and a lot of times it has to do with credit. It has to actually do with fronting the money and allowing farmers then to pool resources together in order for them to realize a certain margin over a certain amount of time, and so they can actually be more focused on producing coffee and less focused on what the actual market is doing. I think that's important.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question to the three speakers? Please.
Hi, I'm Ricardo Ska from Rabobank. Keith, I don't know if you remember me. A question regarding your projections for Brazil right now. If you could let us know the number you have for this year and maybe next year.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, actually, that was a secret slide I didn't show because I didn't want it to be. I didn't want it to be actually. But it's less of a projection of what I think. It's more of a projection of what I think the level of Brazilian production needs to be for the world in Arabica to go into deficit. Because if you look at the world as a whole, it's great, but there's two very distinct coffee markets, and with the arbitrage where it is now, we have to expect some pretty significant shifts as far as demand and potential demand goes. You know, Arabica demand didn't grow at all for the last couple of years because of the price and the arbitrage, and the arbitrage goes down to a point where we think that Arabica demand will grow in 13-14 or 14-15, and then the ARB goes crazy again to the point now where we think that is very much threatened. So the level, I believe, in 14-15 of a Brazilian production, and that's around 48 million, 49 million bags. If we produce less than that, the Arabica world, in my mind, goes into a deficit relative. And that also includes 15-16, around 47 to 48 million bags. So now I'm sort of just waiting to see where we go, and that's kind of the level in which I believe, and this is making major assumptions. This is the assumption of 27 million bags of exports. This is the assumption of they're sitting on around 8 million bags of stocks already, and the assumption that they consume domestically around 21 million bags. Domestically, I think they consume 12 million bags of Robusta and 9.5 million bags of Arabica. So it's less of what I think because, you know, now I'm just sort of waiting with everybody else. It's more of that 49, 48 number I think is very important as far as the deficit goes.
Please.
Leonardo Bichara, International Sugar Organization. I'm not an expert in the coffee market, But the question here perhaps for Kona and Keith. We heard this morning very bullish projections for consumption growth in countries like China and India, where coffee consumption is very, very small at the moment. Where do you see production rising in the world to meet that growth in demand, considering that we also saw some charts showing very rapidly growing production costs in coffee in countries like in Central America and also in Brazil? Thank you.
I believe that would be Brazil. Brazil has the commercial scale, it has the land, it has the area, the knowledge, and the way it's been developing so far. I think it has the ability to keep on growing. Obviously, the long-term picture will be determined by competing crops, sugarcane or oranges or eucalyptus, whatever. But no, I think if you look at any one region in the world where you will continue to see expansion in Arabica, that would be, and Robusta actually, that would be coffee, Brazil. Vietnam has surprised us in terms of the phenomenal growth we've seen there. So no obvious reason to see that stopping. So yeah, it's just more of a continuation of the existing trend. I'm less positive on the future long-term structural growth in Central America, though, where I think I think the commerciality and land issues and labor cost issues might be more of an impediment there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think Brazil is definitely going to continue to, based on cost, based on demand, it's definitely going to continue to be the driver there. I also think that, and this is very much dependent on price, but the potential for African production to increase significantly is also there, based on yield, among a number of things. I think a lot of that demand is Robusta, and that means that Vietnam will also have to probably continue to grow as well. But their breakneck growth in the last 10 years doesn't look like it's going to be slowing down anytime soon. And you still see there acres and acres of newly planted Robusta trees, so it seems like it will continue.
My name is Surendra Katecha. I'm an independent advisor in coffee. With that answer, I've heard a potential figure for Brazil production as 72 million bags potential. Would you agree with that? And where would you put the Vietnam numbers? Where's the saturation point?
What's the price of coffee? I think that's the most important aspect. 72 is a theoretical number I've heard as well. But if people are making money, I think that there's still expansion potential there. The saturation point of Vietnam is a little bit more, I think, relevant given the population of Vietnam and the area there. But at the same time, we don't want to fall into some sort of Malthusian idea that we are also not increasing the yield, because the Vietnamese farmers are very good about producing, planting the newest varieties and keeping up on the farming and agricultural science as far as that goes. We have a demand scenario, but we also have a supply scenario, and that supply scenario isn't predicated only on the growth of area, but also the growth of production by yield. And I think that's important because while Central America does very good, Brazil, but there are a lot of places in the world where yield can increase quite significantly, and you wouldn't even need an area expansion at all.
You had a question as well?
Thank you. It took a while, Tony Allen from King's College, it took a while for this group to respond to questions this time because we were all driven back by the intensity of the new information. Thank you very much, it was very important. You've just begun to do it again, Keith, but earlier on in your replies you did weave us back into the theme for the day, sustainability. Clearly you're thinking about commercial sustainability. But can you weave us back into, you've started to answer it just before there in terms of the potential for increased yields and so You're clearly, and it's very important that people in your position should have this perspective, because you have the the leverage, the resources perhaps to steer things in a particular direction. I'm very interested in what the mindset of people like yourselves is, if you're so optimistic. You feel that the coffee sector is, in terms of a supply chain, in good hands. In terms of the upper part of the supply chain, the farmers actually manage, as you're suggesting, are managing things at the bottom. They have the labour to pay, they've got to use the water and so on. You think that they're helped by all the information that you've been talking about?
Well, that's a complex question. I believe that the sustainability, and I've seen it in practice quite a number of times, whether that be in Africa or Central America or Brazil, is really a function on the sustainability of the household or whatever size agricultural enterprise it happens to be producing the coffee. Nobody in that sort of situation wants to ever create a situation where there are negative externalities, where there are impacts of coffee production that would negatively impact the environment in which they're working in. And whether that be co-ops banding together to produce a meal and using that water to produce energy. But much of that, and the idea that they're going to be able to shepherd and watch over the sort of environment that they're producing on, is a function of their own margins. I mean, I think that the government certainly has to come in at some point and certainly internalize externalities. And if the government isn't willing or able to do that, then we might have to see that up and down the supply chain. But I think one of the most important parts of the coffee supply chain is the ability to have farmers be liquid, to have them realize a margin and not operate in the red, so they can do the things that they need to do relative to short-term sales that will actually negatively impact their environment, for example, or something like that.
Could I just quickly follow on? You're suggesting that it's the state that has to look after the...
No, I'm sorry. No, that was not what I meant at all. No, what I'm suggesting is that there is always a better situation when the coffee farmer is in a positive margin, when they're making money. I think the state plays a role, but many times the state role is... the state isn't fulfilling its role to completion. And so what happens is that we have to just look at the agricultural enterprise as its own whole. And in order for it to be healthy, in order for it to worry about its own environment, whether that is paying the laborers, making sure that the environmental impacts any sort of production or milling have on its local environment, are very much contingent on whether or not the mill can make money. And it doesn't have to be massive profits, it just can't be operating in the red and have to potentially take side steps. Yeah. And a lot of that actually, and I don't want to offer this as a sales pitch, but a lot of that has to do with managing the volatility of the price. And it has to do with managing the volatility of, to a lesser extent, the FX. And what is good is when you can get co-ops and organizations to manage that price and not try to pick the price, but have a medium price and operate sort of with a margin already inherently there. And whether or not they can, and there's many small farmers who can't afford such instruments, and so that then would be either the state's role or an NGO or some sort of organization role to help try to the ICO, for example, to help try to further that, further the development of risk-taking, risk-hedging derivatives in the daily operation. The idea is that they just want to be healthy to make money, and that is difficult in coffee. So,
could I just ask, are you an accountant or an economist?
I'm an economist.
I thought so, yeah. in that clearly you don't see any point in trying to cost the environment, because you're assuming that it can be somehow looked after if the farmers are getting the right price. But if they're not getting the right price, then we can't do it. And it's partly because the market is something without any way of accounting for the environment.
Well, no, I think that there are all kinds of external negative externalities that are happening in all kinds of production. But you know, if you have a rule of law, if you have a government that's probably trying to minimize these, whether that be dumping litter or what have you, creating a minimum wage, that plays a role. You know, because you have to look at the agriculture enterprise within its scope of existence. And it's not easy to say that in order for the sustainability of the agricultural enterprise, X needs to occur. In reality, what has to happen is that you need to have an environment that the government or some organization is supervising. You need to have a number of other rules and guidelines for an agricultural enterprise, and I think that you need to have, you know, an agricultural enterprise be profitable. So I'm not saying that I think it's all market-driven, because we obviously, even as an agricultural economist, understand that there are things beyond that, but I think that it plays a major role.
Yeah.
Just wanted to also add, I think environmental costs are often embedded within the production costs, if you like. So the reason why we've moved to Brazil as a dominant producer is partly because they are water rich. The biggest variable cost of production right now happens to be labor, the hiring of temporary labor during the cherry picking, harvesting. They're now moving away from that towards mechanization. So there is an evolution with the right price. You know, let's say like we're in the middle of a drought right now in Brazil. With the right price, Brazil will start ensuring that they implement the right kind of irrigation facilities to make sure they counter any kind of water shortage issues. But obviously that doesn't solve the longer term damage you're doing to the soil or the environment. But if and when that happens, you know, farmers are still very short term, but if and when that happens, again, the production will shift to wherever they're towards the water rich areas, wherever that may be.
Tell us where that is.
Thank you very much. Maybe one last question before the coffee break.
How much more does it cost to produce Arabica than Robusta?
Where?
Well, anywhere, like say Brazil.
Well, I always am reticent to give headline numbers like that, because agricultural cost of production varies quite significantly within even a country relative to whether it's mechanized, traditional, or whatnot. I would say the cost of a bag of Arabica is probably now, the exchange rate, maybe 370 reais a bag. And the Cognon cost I would put at probably little less than 200, around 200.
What are the main factors which make such a huge difference between the two?
Yield, land, productivity, fertilizer, and the amount of labor. What you have to realize that there are two different types of coffee, so the agronomic aspects of them are different, allowing certain, you know, Robusta is a raw, robust plant relative to Arabica, meaning that you can have some leeway there. You know, you're able to grow it in a different area, in a wider range of areas. So if you look at the cost of production in Vietnam, it's probably around 80 cents a pound, something like that, 70 cents a pound, depending on the exchange rate.